With Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur coming up, I have decided to tackle what I know is one of the most burning and vexing questions that we all think about on our lead up to these big days. What does the well-dressed Jew wear to synagogue on Yom Kippur? Now, there's a good chance we have a lot more options than, say, our grandparents' generation. They typically had two sets of clothes. They had the daily clothes that they wore every day to work and a pair of work shoes. They had one set of nice clothes that they might wear to synagogue or to church, and a nice pair of dress shoes, and probably a sweater and a sturdy winter coat. Today, there's a good chance you all have a lot more options. I won't speculate on what's in your closet, but I dare say that our grandparents' generation never heard of the idea of a walk-in closet. But many of you may have in your homes walk-in closets, and I get it. If you want to be with it, fashion is important. So then, with the high holidays just a few weeks away, and especially I'm thinking of Yom Kippur, what does the well-dressed Jew wear? Well, for hundreds of years, and perhaps even longer, the well-dressed Jew knew exactly what to wear. In those days, this was for he, but you can make this more general for everybody. He wore a kittel. The kittel is a white, looks like a robe, right? And it ties across the front. That's what the well-dressed Jew wore to synagogue. Now, of course, fashions in the contemporary world come and go. Skirts can be long, skirts can be short, lapels can be wide, lapels can be narrow. There can be a time that pants are supposed to be form-fitting, sometimes baggy. There are the times where their bright colors are in that year, other times muted. The list is endless, but the kittel, I have to tell you, hasn't changed much. So I was reflecting, is there something that we can learn from the idea that on the holiest day of the year, Yom Kippur, we wear a kittel? 25 years ago, Rabbi Robert Kahn wrote a piece about the kittel in an obscure book that I happened to be reading. I was crazy about the article. I put it away, and I've been waiting 25 years to share both his and some of my ideas, but I want to note him. And by the way, even if you don't wear a kittel personally, and I don't have the expectation that a lot of folks are going to show up to Stephen Wise Temple on Yom Kippur with a kittel, but by the way, if you do, that's fantastic. But even if you don't, I think there's something we all can learn from the idea of the kittel. The first is that it reflects a certain level of equality. It's standard. Whether you are rich or poor, whether you are prominent or not, everybody wearing a kittel looks the same. There's no label on the kittel. So if you bought your kittel at Neiman Marcus, or if you bought it at Target, and by the way, I don't think either of them are selling kittels, it just occurred to me, the minute that Neiman Marcus and Target sells kittels, it will be the Messianic age. Right now, they are not. The kittel is a simple garment. It's not expensive because it emphasizes the dignity of all of us standing before God. It reminds us that God's not particularly interested in what's on the outside, but far more what's on the inside. Both Rabbi and cantor and congregants wore a kittel. It started with the priest who led worship, but soon every Jew began to wear a white robe. And it also reflects that there's no intermediaries between the worshiper and God. There's no special class, no priests who we could ask to pray for us or to sacrifice for us in order to get God's forgiveness. Every Jew was responsible directly to God, and God and this is the corollary, was accessible to every Jew. So the kittel reflected a level of equality. The kittel also reflects freedom. It's not as well known, but there's another time, one other holiday, when traditionally a Jew wore a kittel, Passover. Passover is the holiday of freedom. In ancient times, by the way, the color that you wore reflected your status. So, for example, if you were royalty, you wore purple, right? If you were free, you wore white. If you were a slave, you wore what was basically an unbleached color. Well, we Jews have often had to wear garments reflecting a diminished status. So on Passover and on Yom Kippur, we wear white because they are symbols of our freedom. Another thing the kittel reflects, because it's white, it stands for optimism. There's a very moving midrash where the rabbis compare the courts here on earth to the heavenly court. In the court on earth, when you come before the judge for sentencing, typically you would wear black, or in Los Angeles, I think you wear a jumpsuit. In California, the orange jumpsuit. But when you come before the heavenly court, before God, Jews wear white. We assume that God is compassionate, and if we engage in true tshuva, which is a very serious process, which means also making it right with the person you have sinned against, then we can be forgiven. So that kittel, that white robe, suggests we are optimistic that God will forgive us. And finally, the kittel is very similar, and in some cases is used as a burial shroud. Traditional Jews are buried in a white shroud made with linen, and many kittels are the same color, the same material, and indeed some people are buried in a kittel. Why? Because on Yom Kippur, why wear it on Yom Kippur? Because Yom Kippur is the day when we're supposed to think about our mortality. Wearing the kittel helps us to do just that. By the way, parenthetically, sometimes taking away choices in life is a gift. Very often you'll sit with the children who have lost a loved one, maybe a parent, and they'll have an argument what to bury their beloved mother or father in. The green suit, the white suit, the dark suit, this tie, this dress, that dress. But when you find out that Judaism prescribes something very specific, it removes the possibility of arguing because it's prescribed. It's sort of like, and forgive the analogy, like Costco, where you go in, you got one choice of flashlight. If you don't like Duracell, you're not buying the flashlight at Costco. But sometimes in life, particularly at times when the possibility of heightened tension can occur, Judaism, in its wisdom, gives us guidance. Sometimes taking away choices is a gift, sometimes. The prophet Isaiah understood just how important clothing was when Isaiah said years ago, God will clothe us in the garments of salvation and cover us with the robe of victory. So you see, my friends, the kittel really is quite a fashion statement, because from the kittel we learn equality before God, the importance of freedom, that we should be optimistic on Yom Kippur, and that we should never take life for granted. And that is just some of the reasons that the well-dressed Jew wore a kittel on the holiest of days. Shabbat Shalom.